when God calls out to Moses and begins this entire section, this entire book really, on the offerings, there's an introductory verse. And that makes sense because we're introducing a new concept. The verse there says, a person who will offer from amongst you an offering to God, from such and such types of animals should be his offering. There are two peculiarities in this verse. And even though it's an introductory verse, so you might say, like, what does it really matter? It's not any kind of a basis of Jewish law, seemingly. It's not a detail in the actual offerings. The fact is that every single letter, and certainly words and verses in the Torah, have meaning and are written in very particular fashion, and you can't just kind of pawn it off to, well, it's just an introductory verse. The two peculiarities are in fact interrelated. First and foremost, the typical term for a person is ish. There are 4 terms for a person in biblical Hebrew. The most common one for when a verse wants to say, a person who will such and such, or a person must such and such, is ish. Here, the verse uses the very atypical term Adam, like Adam. Number 2, it's awkwardly worded, and the Torah is perfect, so it can't be awkwardly worded. A person who will offer from amongst you an offering would read a lot better if it were a person from amongst you who will offer an offering. But it doesn't say it that way. It says it in a more awkward way. Why? The sages tell us that first and foremost, the usage of Adam or Adam as opposed to Ish is actually a reference back to the person named Adam, the very first person in the world. When he offered offerings to God, he did so from animals that belonged to him because he was the only person in the world and everything belonged to him. In the same way, we can only offer things that belong to us. You can't take somebody else's animal or vegetable or whatever and say, well, look, it's a mitzvah, it's a good deal, it's an amazing thing to offer things to God. I'm going to do it for my fellow, whether he likes it or not, whether he knows about it or not. I'm going to offer his something, his, goat for God. Can't do that. It has to be yours. Just like Adam only offered those things that are his. That's the simple legalistic explanation. The deeper understanding of why it says Adam or Adam is based on explaining the second peculiarity. Like we said, they are interrelated. The Hebrew word for offering or will offer or sacrifice, all of those, is related, in fact it's basically the same, to the word in Hebrew for approaching or coming close. And so, when we reread that introductory clause with that other translation, we render it as a person who will come close. From you must be the offering to God. The idea of the offerings is not to make a barbecue. God doesn't need a barbecue, and even we could make a much better barbecue than the way that the offerings are designed. The idea of the offerings is to take an animal as it represents our animalistic self. And what kind of animal also matters in that it relates to a particular kind or characterization of our animalistic self. A coarser animal is a coarser character trait. A less coarse animal is a less coarse animal trait, and so on and so forth. And so when we do the offerings properly, of course, when there's an altar in a temple, we actually bring an animal, that's for sure. And it's actually slaughtered, and it's actually processed in whatever particular way it has to be. But the deeper intent is that we should take that animalistic aspect of ourselves that this animal represents and offer that to God, transforming it from it's all about me to it's all about God. A person, therefore, who wants to come close from you, from us, must be the offering to God from our animalistic self. And this harkens back to Adam. Adam only offered those things that belonged to him because, again, he owned everything. But the fact that the verse uses his name as opposed to the word ish means that we can only offer that which is ours. A person should help his fellow in his particular journey towards Hashem, for sure. But as far as the severity or constriction or judgment that is inherent in offerings and sacrifices, that really ought to be reserved for ourselves. We can only offer those things that are from us. It's really not my place to take my fellow's animalistic self and schlep it along and offer it on the altar. The best I can do is to be a disciple of Aaron, the Kohanim, who processed the offerings but didn't take them from the person without that person's will. And so being for myself the one offering of myself, and being for my fellow a disciple of Aaron who will positively influence him to make that decision on his own, is the dichotomy that really the offerings include.